So what it means to be an American. Now, patriotism is a great strategy for any country, any nation. But I think the principles are deeper. So what it means to be an American, I can just say I'm proud to be an American. That's the surface level. But we have to dig deeper. And what it means to be American are expressed in our most sacred document. This document right here, the Declaration of Independence. And unfortunately, in the past 80 years, there has been an assault on the principles of the Declaration of Independence. And my goal and my duty as an American is to preserve the Constitution from foreign and domestic threats. And when I see in our media, in our politics, in government, that there are people in certain positions that want to threaten what America stands for on the basis of the principles, it is my duty as an American to stand up and fight against that through all kinds of means, through speeches, through advocacy. And that's my goal here today, to do that. So it's going to be a serious topic, but a necessary topic. And as Abraham Lincoln said, if we violate our most sacred principles, we will cease to be a nation. And so our understanding today is we need to understand the principles of the Declaration of Independence because those express American principles. Thomas Jefferson said this to his letter to Henry Lee. He said, the Declaration of Independence was not my invention. It merely expresses the American mind. Those are the principles of the Declaration. And in Proverbs, if you read Proverbs 25:11, Abraham Lincoln said this, a word fitly spoken is like apples of gold and pictures of silver. So the words of the Declaration of Independence are like the apples of gold, and the Constitution is the pictures of silver that protects those principles. And when I was young, when I was a child, not too long ago, I was sitting on my dad's lap. My dad immigrated here as a legal immigrant from Afghanistan. He faced tyranny for several years, living under a tyrannical government. And during that time, I was asking him, I was curious. I told him, I said, why are we here, Dad? I know we're from Afghanistan. What brought you here? And he looked at me and he said, son, I had to sacrifice for you, right? For you, for my family. I made a lot of sacrifices to be in the greatest country on earth. So he said that in order for us to really appreciate the country, my dad told me, he says, we really have to go look at our founding documents. And my dad's journey begins in his home country of Afghanistan. So when my dad was growing up, Afghanistan was a constitutional monarchy. So there was 40 years of peace. And all of a sudden you had the Communist Party within the country. This is during the Cold War. You had a Communist Party inside of Afghanistan that took over. So when they took over, they went to the president's palace. They killed the president. They killed his entire family. And then you had the Stalinist Communist Party of Afghanistan take over the government. And when that happened, the government stripped all the Afghani citizens of all their rights. My dad could not sell his property. The government seized my grandpa's property, my aunts, my uncles. All their property was seized. And what did the government do? They just gave them the bone. They said, you can live on your property, but you can't sell it. So what does that really mean? The government owns your property. Also, in places of worship, religious institutions, when the Afghanis would visit their religious institutions, there would be communist spies spying on them. And when they would catch someone go into a religious institution, they would put them in prison and question them. One of my uncle actually was tortured for a month by the government. Right. My dad's brother, one day, my dad's brother was 20 years old. And my dad came home, and he was in his 20s at this time. This was during the late 70s time frame, late 70s, early 80s. So my dad came home, my grandpa said, hey, where is your brother? And we found out he was killed. Yeah. He was in his 20s. My dad's cousin was protesting against this tyrannical government. And under the communist regime, right, there are no individual rights. It's all about the collective, right? By any means necessary. So the way the communist ideology works is that the state is the cell. And whoever we are, we, the people in power, whoever we think is the cancer, we can wipe them out. That is their ideology. So they feel that if anyone threatens the government, we can wipe them out. And that's what they did. So my dad's cousin was protesting against the government, and they shot him. They shot all the protesters with tanks. You see this happening in Venezuela today. So it's Stalin's old playbook there. They're using the communist playbook. And that's why this topic is so essential today. Because as Americans, we need to understand our principles, use the Declaration as our guiding political principle to be able to make political decisions. Who's in power? What kind of laws are being passed? Because once we know the principles of the Declaration, when laws are passed that are oppressing my rights, my freedom of religion, now there are laws, if you go to a religious institution, there are laws being passed that if your religious institution does not conform with what the government thinks is good, you may lose your tax-exempt status. So these are all the experiences my dad went through, this oppression. He wanted to escape that. And when I am in this country and I see certain laws being passed, it reminds me of my dad's story. He went through these types of oppressions in terms of freedoms being prohibited, property being taken away. So that's why I'm very passionate about this subject, right? When there's any infringement on property rights, for example, through excessive taxation or limitation of my being able to practice my religion, it is my duty as an American to stand up, challenge those laws, right? Put individuals in positions of power who I will feel will respect my rights and liberties. So that's my duty there. So what happened here, back to my dad's story, when he was talking to me about his journey, his struggles, what happened right after this time period, we're talking about the late 70s, early 80s, you had these individuals, I call them the butchers. They're known as the butchers of Afghanistan. These were the communist leaders of the country. They killed hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. And it was bloodshed. So it was, the way that the government worked, it was ridiculous. You had the president of the party and the vice president. The vice president was suspicious of the president. He assassinated the president. And then he maintained power, straight from the communist playbook. Right? And then this gentleman right here, right, he was known to be a severe butcher. His name was Hafizullah Amin. And so he killed a lot of people to the point where Brezhnev, right here, Brezhnev was the president of the Soviet Union at that time. Brezhnev told Amin, hey, back off. Get some more buy-in from the people. When Brezhnev thinks that you're going too far, that's a problem. So under his regime, what happened, then you had this gentleman here. So Amin was suspicious of a man named Babrak Karmal. So you had two types of communist parties, all on the same thread. You had this gentleman who was the Stalinist, leader of the Stalinist Communist Party, and then this gentleman, his name is Babrak Karmal. He was the leader of the Maoist Communist Party, and they had infighting. So this gentleman, Amin, kicked Babrak Karmal out because he feared that he will take power. So he was exiled in Russia. So Brezhnev took him in. He said, hey, you can live in Moscow. So Brezhnev talked with Babrak Karmal and said, you know what, this guy Amin, we don't really like him. We're going to assassinate Amin and we'll put you in power. And that is what happened a year later. So Amin only was president for 1 year and he was assassinated. And Babrak Karmal on the plane, right, came down and landed in Afghanistan, and his party took power and he became president for 6 years. And he was pretty tyrannical as well. Did the same thing. Had spies spying on all the citizens. Family was reporting on family, spies inside your family. If you were to say anything bad against the government, who knows, you disappear all of a sudden. So that's how tyrannical and oppressive that was. So it came to a point where the Russian army, so the Soviet Union, they brought their tanks to support the communist leaders of Afghanistan. And once this happened, the communist government was recruiting young men to join their military. There was no way my dad and my grandparents wanted my family, my aunts and uncles to take part in that government. So they told my parents, they told my aunts, my uncles, we need you to leave the country. That's it. We're not going fight them, right? My parents were educated. My grandfather was a vice principal at a high school. My dad was an engineer for trade. My uncle was a doctor. They're professional, working class people. And they said, we have to get out of here. So what happened was my grandfather gave my dad thousands of dollars. Gave him thousands of dollars. He's like, we have to be apart for a while. Who knows where our destiny lies, right? But you have to leave right away. So he gave my grandfather gave my father thousands and thousands of dollars to pay and hire an escape tour guide. During this time period in Afghanistan, you had escape tour guides, and that was their trade, helping Afghanis escape oppression, escape the communist government. So they do all the tours of the mountains, all the mountainous routes to help you flee the country. So my father hired one of these individuals. And what's interesting before this is that my dad's college friend escaped Afghanistan. He was able to make it to Germany. So when he was in Germany, my dad's friend wrote my dad a letter, and at that time the government would read your mail, right? There was no right to privacy. They would read your mail. So my dad's friend had to write in secret code, implying that, hey, I want you to come to Germany. Because if he were to say that directly, the government would come and probably arrest my father. So my father got the picture. He got the hint. And once that happened, my dad's plan was this. I'm going to hire this escape tour guide. We're going to have a 4-day journey escaping Afghanistan through the mountainous routes. And I will go to Pakistan, and I will fly. I have